Coming up, has the odd start to the NBA season changed the landscape for trades and what the Brooklyn Nets believe is the right and easiest path forward throughout the year? We dive in, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms, and let you know that you can start every single season with big returns on FanDuel. New customers place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. And Doug, we take a pause with the Brooklyn Nets at 4-4 Friday night special against the Boston Celtics. We talked about some really big matchups coming up over the next week and a half for them. But when you peel back and you look at the NBA landscape, suddenly there's way more teams that are below or in the same boat as the Brooklyn Nets this year, as opposed to a highly competitive Eastern Conference filled with a ton of buyers looking for all the veteran talent the Nets have to offer.
Yeah, it's early, 10% of the way, but we're 10% of the way through the NBA season already. And for a lot of teams, this has not started the way you thought it was going to. I mean, Nets obviously being one of the top of the list. They're 4-4 with the third, you heard this correct, third best point differential in the Eastern Conference, behind only the Cavs at 9-0 and the Celtics at 7-2. They're 12.6, 11.7. The Nets are, fifth. I did this wrong. They're fourth overall. It doesn't matter because it's still a surprise. They're fourth overall in record, and they're fifth overall in point differential. Doesn't matter. I buried it a little bit, but it's still super weird. So even if I got it right out of the gate, my eyes went a little cross there at the beginning. So even if the Nets are one of the top of the list in terms of weirdness, but then you have all these other teams that have started some in the worst way imaginable. You have the Bucks at 1-6. You have the Sixers at 1-6, right? Then you have some other teams, and the West is a little bit more of a log jam. Although some of those teams are already kind of like maybe getting close to the complete version of themselves, and no matter what. And you kind of have this like maybe four teams that have already separated themselves as just being head and shoulders above everyone else. The Cavs, like I said, Celtics, I think we know what we're getting from them. Suns look awesome to start the year. Thunder look awesome. And somehow, I mean, I can't even totally include them right now, but the Warriors look unbelievable. Like they look unbelievable. And so now you just start looking at this beginning landscape and you start to think to yourself, like, sort of, how do the Nets fit in here? Because they're a little better or a lot better than we thought they were going to be. And I'm not sure we see from these teams that are kind of rising to the top a trade landscape that really favors the Nets in trying to unload some of these assets at premium costs from other teams. And I think this is not exactly how we were hoping things would shake out to start the season.
11 teams there in the Western Conference that are 500 or better, just 4 in the East, and the Nets are one of them. So the Eastern Conference is certainly not unfold the way we anticipated. And to your point, it's when you looked out there, especially in the Western Conference, and you look at the Suns, you say, my God, they're finally figuring it out, right? And the Thunder coming off obviously a number 1 overall seed a year ago. Whether or not the Warriors stick, that's fine. But the Mavericks are still a good team. The Nuggets, they're going to deal with their Aaron Gordon injury going forward here. But complete teams and teams that are playing at a really high level to start the year, barring injury, are not going to be buyers. They're going to be ultra satisfied with what they've done. Not to mention the fact that in some of these cases, like in the instance of the Phoenix Suns, well, they've already unloaded a lot of what they have available to them to make additions like this. OKC, different example, but that's as much a factor as anything in this. And you're right. Like, it does feel different, whether it's teams that are playing so well, meeting expectations, and aren't necessarily going to need to add firepower. And then the flip side, Eastern Conference, where a team like the Milwaukee Bucks or the 76ers, are they even going to bother trying to buy to turn this thing around? Because at a certain point, 8 games seems like nothing, but it is 10%, as you said, of the season. At a certain point, you just do the math and you go, do we have a 25-5 run in us midway through this year to make sure we get back into a good position? It does become fascinating, especially in the East, of how these teams look at it. Philadelphia is kind of on its own island, but Milwaukee has already had the rumblings, as we've discussed. Giannis, does he want to stay? Could he opt out? And do the Bucks ultimately look at it and say, maybe we need to make the hard choice earlier rather than later? But it's crazy to think how all of the prep that you do, everybody coming into the season, how it's going to stack up, where everyone's going to finish, Nets are going to be terrible. Cut to 10% in, Nets 5th best point differential, and sitting in a position where you have to say, do they need to change how they look at this season?
I don't think the Bucks are throwing in the towel this season. So I want to be really clear about that. Like, I think this could go all the way off the rails and they just won't do that. Giannis is too good. Go ahead. What's up?
Oh, no. I was gonna say, I don't think they are, but like the towel may be getting thrown in for them, whether or not they want to or not. If they sit there at the trade deadline, and I don't know what the record's going to be, but if you're 10 games, 12 games under 500 at the trade deadline, and you think about the long term in the offseason, it's just going to be, another half season away from Giannis saying, it's over, let's move on. Then I think you'd have to at least have that hard discussion, though most NBA teams with superstar talent tend to wait as long as humanly possible to make that hard choice. I agree with you.
Yeah, there. You get like every once in a while you get like these Anthony Davis ones, but like for they're few and far between when it comes to in season season on these guys.
Even the Nets tried to do this with Kevin Durant. They were like,
I take it back. Jeez, Kevin Durant's the example. That's my bad. Like Kevin Durant, I've got PTSD from that. I just totally skipped by the one where the Nets actually did it with Kevin Durant. My bad.
But even in those instances, I was almost going to use it to support you. Although the timing of it goes in my category. When you think about it, it's like, well, okay, yeah, we're going to move on from James Harden, but we're going to bring back Ben Simmons and try to make that work. Okay, we're going to move on from Kyrie Irving, but Kevin, we know that you wanted to be here with him, but give us a chance. And they waited another, chunk of time before they ultimately. You're always trying to kick the can just a little bit further to keep a superstar, or in the Nets case, keep one of the many superstars that you had on the roster.
Yeah, I think it just all points to like just a very weird situation. Again, the things we talk about in November aren't often the things we're talking about in April. That's just the nature of the season. We've been Nets fans know that better than anybody. We had discussions last November that looked very different than the end of the season. Season before, when the aforementioned, Kevin Durant trade, they were on a sick run, and then all of a sudden the team's blown up and everything goes to the heck in a handbasket. So these things aren't. These things don't play out. It's more of a taking a top-down view of the league. And I think we would agree that in large part, the season is not shaking out. And when a couple of these teams like the Bucks, like the Sixers, start 2-12 to start the season, right? 2-12 for those teams to start. Like, you start to dig a hole, and then you look at the middle group and you start to think, and we'll get into this in a second too with this middle group, you start to think like, how incentivized are these folks going to be to try to contend with this group above? And there's some other teams that have these levers to pull, like the Heat, that might go in a different direction too. So like there's all sort of points to maybe not starting out in the Nets tanking and unloading favor. For sure, they've already kind of maybe starting to undo the tank already. All right, we're going to get into more of this. We'll take a look at some of these more teams in the Eastern Conference. We'll talk about that here in 1 second. First, tell you about our friends over at Skims. Look, I wear underwear every day. You wear underwear every day. Maybe you haven't switched up the type of underwear you bought for a long time. Maybe going back to college. My goodness, it can be a long time. We can get stuck in those habits. For those who haven't heard yet, Skims now offers men's underwear. I'm here to tell you it is worth the hype. I always like the good square cut 3-inch boxer brief. What I don't like is when the boxer briefs ride up between those legs. Look, I'm with the kids all the time, traveling a decent amount, always on the move. Luckily, Skims found a way to create the perfect 3-inch stretch boxer brief, give you all the movement you need throughout the day, the perfect comfort for those long trips out on the road. Like I said, when you're just playing with the kids or just out there enjoying life, all those other 3-inch boxer briefs have officially been put on notice. Shop Skims Men at skims.com. Let them know we sent you after you place your order. Select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the perfect gift for the whole family, Skims just launched their biggest holiday shop ever. Also available at skims.com.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the landscape of the NBA, and maybe even more specifically the Eastern Conference, as the Brooklyn Nets are 500. They'll take on the Celtics on Friday. They'll play a game in between. They'll take on the Celtics again. I think it's going to be the Pelicans. Then they got the Cavs mixed in, the Knicks mixed in. So who knows? We said this earlier in the week. Who knows what it'll look like for the Nets on their tank agenda another handful of games from now. But the other part, I guess the flip side of this would be how many teams are capable of buying, who can be in on it. The Bucks don't have anything to give anyway. First and foremost, there's where it stands when you look over at the draft rankings right now. We know that Philadelphia, Utah, These are all teams. Milwaukee, by the way, is the #1 overall pick right now, just in case you're wondering. And no, the Nets will not get that. Philadelphia has a protected 1 through 6. Utah has another one up there as well. Toronto, Orlando, the Pelicans, Washington. It's interesting to think about teams like, say, Washington, and Nets fall into this category as well, as they want to protect their own first-round pick. What choices do they make, and how much are they willing to sacrifice? And looking for buyers is going to be different, because some of the teams you would have assumed want it are not going to be there for you. But as you mentioned before, the Heat are 3-4. I don't know which way they're going to end up going. Maybe they make a pivot. The Chicago Bulls, where are they going to be in another handful of games? They're only 3-5 right now. The Hornets started out worse and are trying to get back in a better direction at 3-5. I wonder if the real discussion here is going to be the market for where players could go for the Nets and these veterans that they have is just going to look different in teams of the teams that you would talk about. It's not going to be the Milwaukee Bucks. It's maybe not going to be the complete teams like the Phoenix Suns, not that they were on the radar. You're going to have to dig a little bit deeper and maybe think about middle of the pack teams that see an opportunity to take a jump up here and cement their playoff positioning because the Eastern Conference is so weak.
Yeah, I mean, are they going to want to pay a premium to do it? Like, that's the question.
That too. Right.
And that's where I started to get worried, because let's say you are like the Knicks, Knicks don't have much left here, but like you're like these Heat teams, right? Or that maybe can't decide which way they're going. You are the Nuggets, who, are going to be without Aaron Gordon, but have not really wanted to spend and kind of like go out there and do it. And they've never done any of this stuff. Like the Nuggets have never gone out and just tried to trade for people. They let KCP walk for money, basically. And he was kind of really important to that team. Like that's just not a team that just goes the extra mile at these times. The Kings already kind of made a move in DDR, and they brought in some guys in the offseason, right? The Mavs have made some of these moves and have a bunch of like stretch wings. Like the Rockets are already kind of have too many guys that can play, right? And so like these are the teams that are kind of sitting around there. Like, the Lakers are always going to be in the discussion. Well, the Grizzlies, like they've let guys go to get the cost cut. And at the risk of already just reading out half the NBA list here, it paints the picture. But it paints the picture of like, hey, I just went through a lot of teams that are not going to be interested. That are, I mean, short of just some injury we haven't seen yet, and that for sure can happen. That's just a lot of teams that are just probably already thinking, no thanks. Either we have those kind of guys here, we don't want to spend the money, we don't already have the assets because we already traded a bunch of stuff to get the guys in the door. I don't know. There's only 32 teams. At some point, you just run out of the list of teams that are going to want to bring in $20+ million for a stretch 3 who's good, but is he going to swing title odds for any of these teams? I'm talking about Cam Johnson here. Forget DFS. Like it gets harder and harder to see it. We've always We've always warned that the landscape for trading these guys is cooler than most people think, right? Yeah. Like it's because everyone just wants Sean Marks to have traded these guys yesterday. And he probably wants to, but when you look at these groups of teams and you start telling yourself a story about how people can convince themselves into doing it, it's hard. It's hard. It was already hard. And the way that the season started has only made it more difficult to see.
And it's funny, too, because we're talking about the East there and it being made a little more wide open. Teams are more into it. The Western Conference would be the example where some teams go, I mean, I don't know, how much are we going to commit to going to try to improve ourselves when it's so congested? And you may be trying to add that asset just to make yourself a first-round exit against, team whoever.
Yes.
Suns, the Thunder, the Warriors, right? So setting yourselves up to, great, we're going to spend a first-round pick and something else and salary match to get Cam Johnson in the door just to get our butts kicked 4-1 in a series. Like, that's not worth it for us, just because we think that maybe the gap here is a little bit tighter. The one thing I will say is, because I want to get to a little bit of a PSA for the Brooklyn Nets fan base as it comes to once you've executed trades. Do you look right now, because I have a team in the Western Conference and a team in the Eastern Conference that I do think, if we're talking about trade radar, should be on the short list here for the Brooklyn Nets. And I specifically went to a very simple stat. I said, hey, 3-point field goal percentage. It matters. The NBA is basically built on that now. And who are a couple of teams that want to be competitive and winning games this year that could also use it? In the East, Orlando Magic. They are league worst, 30% from beyond the arc. Okay, great. We got a number of guys that you could potentially use. That makes a ton of sense to me. Point stop right there. That's like an obvious landing spot right now, you'd say, for the Brooklyn Nets if they're looking to move some of these perimeter vets.
That's probably the most obvious one, right? Yeah. Is that they have flexibility. They have some younger players, but I can't imagine they're going to want to move off some of these guys. But at the same time, they're they could maybe be incentivized. The Paolo injury kind of screws things up a little bit for them. So I'm going to see like where we're going to have to see where they are in terms of overall record. And if they feel like they're one of these teams, I mean, again, they pulled their case.
By the way, they're 3-6 on a 5-game losing streak right now. Don't want to shock you. They're another team that's having a hard time at the start of their season.
Right. And they lost their best player. Right. And so for an extended period of time. And so, yes, that is an obvious one. Again, if they're looking at, like, they have a longer horizon here too. Like, they don't need to kind of cash it all in here. Like, they have Franz, they have Paolo, they have Jalen Suggs. Like, they have these guys locked up. That's good for a couple years. Like, they don't need to push their chips in this season. But that is a team that jumps off and says that one would make sense.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because like this goes back to whether it's the start of the season, Middleton out for the Milwaukee Bucks. Okay, so your record looks like a mess, and you're not sure. It's not your best player, but now Orlando is going through that as well. So take one team and put them into the maybe category when it comes to whether or not they're going to move all their chips into the center of the pile. The other one for me, Western Conference, that's going to be the Spurs for a very different reason. Not because, oh my goodness, they're just a player away from being high-level competitive in the West. It's because they went out this past off season and made moves to make the team better around Wemby. They're a 3-5 team. I don't know whether or not they're going to be competitive for a play-in position, but they clearly have the mentality of wanting to be a better team around their young superstar, and they're sitting there with 32% from beyond the arc, 4th worst in the league. You put Cam Johnson onto that roster, it starts to make things look a lot better, and Chris Paul's already has been doing, wouldn't you know it, Chris Paul is doing Chris Paul things no matter where you stick them.
And they've been without Vassell to start the season. They just lost Sohan for some time. I mean, they already, I mean, not like Sohan's a 3-point shooter, but they definitely need that floor spacing too. Those two teams make sense. Again, I don't think it's over for the Nets to make these trades at all. I think there's and again, let's skip ahead here, past Christmas through the New Year's, 2025, future's looking bright. All of a sudden, the Nets, there's going to be a lot of these teams that are just in different situations. We get it. It's just like trying to look at, I guess our point is, I don't think this list is likely to grow tons. I guess like that's the point. I think those two teams are great examples. York Magic and Spurs examples are perfect examples of teams that could probably make a strong case to think hard about it. Honestly, maybe even the Cavs, like Strus stays out, and like they started off awesome, but maybe they start to feel like, hey, really this, but they got Niang, they got Merrill, they have some other guys off the bench that can like still shoot. And so it's a little bit different there. But in general, I just don't think that we're going to see this list. Like, let's say our list is 2 teams right now. They're like, oh, those are 2 good ones, right? And maybe you want to throw in a couple of them around the fringes. Do we think that list is going to grow by 6 teams into the trade deadline? It's hard to see that. I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah, and you turn around, and as you mentioned with Orlando or any of these teams, how desperate are they to make the move, as opposed to championship caliber, need the firepower, want to go all in, like the Lakers are every single season when it comes to LeBron and that mentality. If they're not those teams, then Sean Mark's going to have a hard time saying, let's get a look at those first-round picks, fellas, start putting them on the table. It may just look like one of those hard choices for the Nets as we work towards the deadline, let alone what they do on the basketball court. Coming up here in a second, Brooklyn Nets make trades. Happens all the time. Nets fans are familiar with it. You can feel free to leave those at the deal table. You don't have to carry any animosity over. We break down a little bit of Mikal Bridges coming up here next.
Before we get into that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. No better time to start getting on the action with our friends over at FanDuel. Whether it's the NFL on Sundays or Thursdays or Saturdays, whenever these teams are playing, or the NBA, which is rolling every single night. New customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL and the NBA. It's all in one place. They got the future stuff as well right now over on FanDuel. If you go to NBA, to go to season awards, Coach of the Year, right now, Coach of the Year favorite, Kenny Atkinson. Old Nets. Could he have done it with the Nets? Nah, had to let him go. DeAndre Jordan had to start. He had to go. Now he's Coach of the Year favorite over there in Cleveland, but that's okay. Jordy Fernandez. Guess who he's tied with in Coach of the Year? He's tied plus 10,000, so not likely. Tied with Nick Nurse and Doc Rivers from the Bucks and Sixers, respectively. Right. So all grouped there at the bottom. 2 of those 3 guys did not expect to be there with our friend Jordy Fernandez. Just some of what you can get over at our friends on FanDuel. You get $150 in bonus bets. We win your first $5 real money bet at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we close out today's Locked On Nets episode, reminder, we'll have our game preview looking at the Boston Celtics on Friday night tomorrow. We're also going to update some injury news and notes, right? We kind of haven't bothered discussing him, but Day'Ron Sharpe, let's figure out when this guy's going to get on the court here, because it does change the dynamic, certainly for a team like the Nets, who are surprisingly 500 on the year. But they're 500 on the year, maybe because they made the hard decision, and then the easy one when all the offers started coming in, of sending Mikal Bridges over to the New York Knicks. You get all these draft picks, and it reminded me, flashed me back immediately, even to when they did the Kevin Durant trade, or the Kyrie trade, or the James Harden trade, any trade. And I know that it's a part of sports fandom, Doug, but there's something that that irks me about the insistence of needing to sit here now, 8 games into the season, and look over and go, can't believe you gave up those picks for Mikal Bridges, huh? That guy standing in the corner, not an all-star, not a superstar. Oh, the Nova Corps, all of those things. There's something I have a hard time watching a fan base, because it makes it feel like you're still trying to sell yourself on it having been a good deal. It was a great deal. The Nets won it. They've already won it. No matter what happens with the picks, the Nets won the Mikal Bridges deal. You can make a very strong case. They won the deal with Kevin Durant because they've been able to reset their franchise. Like, everything is generally, take it with the spirit it's intended, worked out for Brooklyn over the course of these very difficult decisions. You don't need to worry about it once the deals have been done. It doesn't matter what Mikal Bridges or what the Knicks do going forward, beyond the draft picks, excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put them in different buckets, because I trading Durant. It's just like, you work so hard to get these guys. Like, and they're that small group. But Bridges is not in that group, so I would get that like at all. And so I think that putting them in separate buckets here is fine. Look, we said at the time that the number of picks they got for Bridges was way beyond anything we thought they could ever get, right? Like, from the Knicks, and being able to somehow combine it with the Rockets piece too, to get those picks back, win WW from a process standpoint. We'll see how it works out in the end. From a process standpoint, for where the Nets were, that was an absolute and utter snap call. Like, it's, you know, again, people can never want to separate the results from the process. I get it. Those people usually aren't the best, you know, people at deducing like problem solving in general, but whatever. But I would encourage you to try, because the process was totally correct. When the part where Bridges had, you know, is a 3-and-D corner wing, basically, when the defense looks rough, and the Knicks are 3 and 4, but they have outscored opponents. They're not going to be, you know, they're going to be a good team this year. I don't think that's like, we're not going to,
a lot of new parts, a lot of new pieces.
And they just have outscored their opponents. Like, they're fine. Like, running a little bad in close games and have blown a couple teams out, right? Like, that's okay. 3 and 4, new pieces, whatever. But the part where like fans do a victory lap in Bridges, I go the other way. I'm like, dude, thank God he was a nice guy and friends with these guys. Like, I'm being serious. Like, it saved the Nets franchise. It saved the Nets franchise that he was friends with these dudes.
It's a great point.
There's no other, like, thank goodness he's a nice guy, that he's boys with these guys from college, that they all kept in touch, and that they were in the same town. It literally saved the Nets franchise from like a rebuilds perspective. They never, ever would have gotten this kind of deal. Anything close for him out in the open market. Nothing close. And if they had gone into the season, it would have even gotten worse, because after he played last season, I mean, Nets were better with him off the court last year. Nets were -3 net rating with him on, -1.5. Okay, yeah, it's bench units. I get it. And the Nets bench units played awesome last year and kept them in some games. So, even so, it wasn't like they were some crazy better team. And it's not like he's jumping off the page in New York either. They never, ever would have gotten anything close to this number of picks, even if you project them all at the back end of the first round, which there probably a lot of them are going to be. It was only because he was boys with these guys from college, and they insisted that they go get him, and then traded one of their other boys in the offseason, but whatever. So
I know.
I don't know. I'm thankful. I'm thankful
about that twist, but hey,
I'm thankful. I don't watch him and think that, like, I thought it was kind of a win-win. I thought the Knicks made sense when they did it, and I thought the Nets made sense when they did it. I didn't think it was like one team should victory lap the other by any stretch.
And by the way, it's one of those good examples of, you know, Sean Marks, who lives on a spectrum in terms of good and bad and better and worse decisions that they've made over the course of his tenure as the GM. But in that moment, when you know a team is desperate, when you know they want to come get their boy and bring him over to play with his buddies, you do turn the screws, right? You say, yeah, I get it. This is an insane amount of assets that I'm asking for you, and I'm going to take them. I'm going to take every last one of them, and I know you're going to give them to me, because you can't go get Mikal Bridges from another roster. You can get his production, you can get his skill set, but you can't get this player. And Jalen Brunson, who has done amazing things to turn that franchise around to be a superstar for them, he says, that's the guy that I need. And credit to the Knicks. They said, all right, we're not going to stop short of satisfying our leader on our roster by going and getting his friend. So it all works out in the end. And that's the part where I go, yeah, so just enjoy it. I hope that Mikal Bridges plays well. I hope the Knicks lose games. I hope the pick stays high. It's 17th right now, next year's draft class. But outside of that, why it doesn't affect me. I hope he plays well, because guess what? Whatever you think about him, he showed up every single game, Iron Man player, played every single night for the Brooklyn Nets, did the best that he could. And I'll make the one actual caveat that I'll throw in here before we get out the door is the reminder that if the Brooklyn Nets had made the decision to go get Jordy Fernandez and hire him as the head coach a year earlier, the Nets might not have made that trade, because he's too good of a head coach, and he would have been figuring out ways to make Mikal Bridges the best version of him, as we've seen this year with this roster. It would have been way harder to have these discussions. They probably would have won 4 or 5 more games a year ago on coaching alone, and we'd be having a much different discussion around where the Nets are and what their short and long-term future looks like.
Great call. Great call. Like, and again, we got made fun of a little, or I am a little bit for calling, like, just for anointing Jordy like this great coach. All of a sudden 8 games into the season, and maybe that's wrong, but we knew, like, he has pedigree already. Like, you coach the Canadian national team, that's a real thing. Like, that's an honor, like, to be able to do something like that with real players on the team. We already knew he had some head coaching chops, plus what we've seen from the early season, just the professionalism and just the new systems and being implement a bunch of new things that are clearly working for the team. Yeah, I think we could all call him so far, like, grade him pretty well on this. And you're right. Like, if they had run some different stuff or just looked competent at times, especially, like, because I think what we can agree on with, like, better coaching, let's just say it from this thing, better, more inspirational coaching, we at least wouldn't have seen the dumpster fire that happened last season, where it was just awful, like, awful for long stretches. They totally stunk when they were trying. I just don't think that was probably in the range of outcomes. And you're right. Like, had that been the case, they probably would have thought about going the other direction, because they wouldn't have wanted to reset with this other guy. So I think the timing just worked out here. I'll never understand the part where people, like, root against players. Like, I just don't really care enough about that personally. I get why fans do it. That's just not my bag, but I don't know. I would encourage you to enjoy a life where you don't do that. But I can't, what are you going to do? Can't handhold people through this stuff.
That's what it is. Yes. Follow that's the advice. That's what I was trying to get to fans. Instead, I kind of yelled at them for a little bit here. What does it serve to spend your time shouting at the clouds? Sit back and enjoy it. Hopefully Mikal plays well. Hopefully the Knicks lose, and Nets get great picks. That's all there is for me on that front of it, as we continue to watch the trade landscape for Brooklyn.
Yeah, I keep the positive outlook, where instead of just rooting against a player, I just root against multiple teams to lose every game. But that's the kind of positivity
I'm rooting against entire organizations to be bad.
I'm not talking about micro negativity. I'm talking macro negativity. That's how you win in life. All right, we're gonna get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets newsletter every day too. Adam is pumping out stories about the Brooklyn Nets every single day. That's on the Locked On Nets newsletter. Go check that out.
I love life because what? And that is Sir Tony Hopkins.
Well, that cut out a little bit, so I didn't really exactly hear what that is, but we're not going to go back and redo it. But what we are going to say is one of the all-time great poets. We're back in tomorrow talking. Yeah, that's one of the all-time great poets. We're back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. It was Anthony Hopkins basketball.